Hi, welcome my channel. This is the story of a woman falsely accused of hiding children she never had. The Blueprints of Deception is a journey to uncover the truth and reclaim justice. The clang of the front door startled Rachel Morgan as it burst open, followed by the sharp click of designer heels echoing across the polished concrete floor of her Savannah architecture studio. She looked up from her drafting table just in time to see Helen Blake, her ex-mother-in-law, striding in with her usual air of superiority, clutching a thick envelope like it was evidence in a criminal trial. Behind her, Chloe Blake, Rachel's former sister-in-law, wore a glare that could cut glass. "Where are they?" Helen barked, voice trembling with fury. "Don't play dumb, Rachel, we know you've been hiding Jonathan's children for 6 years." The accusation hung in the air, absurd and yet somehow heavy. Rachel blinked, her heart thudding in confusion. "Children?" she echoed, standing slowly. "Jonathan and I never had children." But Helen wasn't listening. She yanked out photos from the envelope and tossed them across Rachel's work table. 2 dark-haired kids beamed back at her from the glossy prints, a boy and a girl. Around 6 years old, in a sunny backyard that Rachel didn't recognize. The resemblance to Jonathan was uncanny. And, disturbingly, there was something about the girl's eyes, familiar. Almost like looking in a mirror. "Stop lying," Chloe hissed. "They're yours, and we're here to bring them home." Before Rachel could gather her thoughts or even demand they leave, her assistant poked her head in, eyes wide. "There's a man here, says he's a private investigator sent by Jonathan Blake." Rachel's stomach twisted. She took a steadying breath and nodded. Moments later, Nate Price stepped into the studio, a tall man in a cheap brown suit, carrying a thick folder and an uncomfortable expression. He introduced himself briskly and laid the folder on the table, flipping it open to reveal school records, medical forms, and, most disturbing of all, birth certificates. According to the documents, Rachel Morgan had given birth to twins, Luca and Ivy, 6 years ago in a clinic in Jacksonville. "This can't be real," Rachel whispered, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. The documents painted a detailed life, multiple addresses across 3 states. Doctor visits, enrollment at a Montessori school in Charleston. "You've moved them 3 times, Nate said, almost apologetically, always just before Jonathan could catch up. Rachel recoiled in disbelief. "I've lived in Savannah for 8 years. I've never moved, never changed my name, never had children." Still, the kids in the photos looked hauntingly real. There had been that dark period during her marriage. 3 months lost in a blur of antidepressants and silence, but surely she would remember giving birth. Wouldn't she? 15 minutes later, the studio door swung open again, this time revealing Layla Tran, Rachel's longtime friend and one of the sharpest family lawyers in Savannah. Dressed in tailored navy and radiating calm authority, Layla took one look at the scene, the photos, the documents, Rachel's pale face, and her expression hardened. "Nobody say another word," she said crisply. Moving to the table, she flipped through the forged birth certificates and medical records with practiced efficiency, her brow furrowing deeper with each page. "These are sophisticated," she muttered, "but they're not bulletproof." She turned to Nate Price. "I'll need copies of everything you've presented. And I want your client's name in writing." Nate hesitated, clearly unsettled. Rachel stood frozen, her heart pounding in her ears. "Layla, what if Jonathan's right? What if something happened during those months I can't remember?" Layla looked up sharply. "No, Rachel, you were depressed. Yes, but you were never delusional. You didn't have children. This is a setup, a well-planned one, but we're going to dismantle it, piece by piece." And just like that, the panic in Rachel's chest eased, not gone, but no longer alone. The next morning, just as Rachel was beginning to feel grounded again, Layla called with news that knocked the breath out of her. Jonathan had filed for an emergency custody hearing, claiming Rachel had abducted his children and kept them hidden across state lines for 6 years. "He's accusing you of kidnapping, Rachel," Layla said grimly, "and he's asking for full custody and immediate return of the twins." Rachel gripped the edge of her kitchen counter, the world tilting. "But there are no children to give back," she whispered. "Exactly," Layla replied, "which is why this could actually work in our favor." Rachel blinked, confused. Layla continued, Her voice sharp and measured. He just made this official. That means discovery, testimony, court records. We get him under oath. And we make him explain where these kids have been all this time, and how. If they're yours, you somehow forgot them. Rachel's hands trembled, but she nodded slowly. If Jonathan wanted a war, he'd get one, and this time, she had the law and the truth on her side. Later that day, Layla called Rachel into her office, her eyes gleaming with a mix of adrenaline and satisfaction. I think I found her, she said, swiveling her laptop toward Rachel. On the screen was a social media profile for a woman named Isabel Hart, a pediatric nurse at Savannah General Hospital. The latest photo showed Isabel standing on a beach, arms around two familiar dark-haired children, Luca and Ivy. Unmistakably the same children from the forged photos. Rachel stared, stunned. They're her kids, she whispered. Not mine. Layla nodded. 7 years ago, Isabel filed a sealed paternity suit against a prominent local developer. Guess who? It hit Rachel like a punch to the chest. Jonathan, she said. He got her pregnant while we were still together, while we were doing fertility treatments. The pieces clicked into place, his distance, his gaslighting, his insistence that she had lost touch with reality. He's been hiding this all along, Layla said, her voice low. But now, to cover his tracks, he's trying to rewrite the story and make you the scapegoat. Rachel clenched her jaw. She was done being anyone's cover story. By the end of the week, Rachel, Layla, and Isabel sat around Layla's conference table. A thick file of evidence spread before them like the blueprint of a takedown. Isabel had agreed, reluctantly at first, to testify. Not for Jonathan's sake, but for her children, who deserved the truth. Layla worked late into the night compiling documents. Isabel's sealed paternity suit, real birth certificates, medical records, and screenshots of the social media posts Jonathan had tried to erase. She filed a motion to dismiss the emergency custody request and a counterclaim for fraud and defamation. He thought he could weaponize the courts to protect his lie, Layla said, sliding the documents into a trial folder. But we're going to make him answer for every word of it, under oath. In front of a judge, Rachel still felt the sting of betrayal. But as she looked between Isabel's steady gaze and Layla's fire, she also felt something new, resolve. The courtroom was no longer just a battleground. It was her chance to reclaim her truth. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Jonathan Blake sat confidently at the plaintiff's table, flanked by his attorney and surrounded by the sympathetic eyes of his mother, Helen, and sister, Chloe. Rachel took her place beside Layla, calm on the surface but burning with anticipation. The judge called the hearing to order, and Jonathan's lawyer launched into a performance dripping with emotion, painting Rachel as an unstable woman who had spiraled after their divorce and abducted his children in a desperate act of vengeance. Helen dabbed her eyes with a tissue, clearly buying into every word. But then it was Layla's turn. With methodical precision, she entered into evidence the real birth certificates, bearing Isabel Hart's name, not Rachel's, and a copy of Isabel's sealed paternity suit, now unsealed by court order. The air shifted, murmurs rippled through the gallery. Then Isabel stood, her voice steady as she looked directly at Jonathan. These are my children, she said, ours, the ones you denied existed until it suited your story. Jonathan paled, his bravado cracking as the judge examined the documents. Mr. Blake, the judge said slowly, would you care to explain why your ex-wife's name appears on falsified records and not the biological mother's? For the first time since the hearing began, Jonathan had no answer. His lie, carefully constructed, ruthlessly protected, was unraveling, thread by thread, under the weight of the truth. The judge didn't need long to make a decision. Jonathan's emergency custody petition was denied on the spot, and the courtroom erupted in stunned silence as the judge ordered a criminal investigation into the forged documents submitted under Rachel's name. Jonathan sat frozen, his world crumbling as bailiffs collected the evidence for official review. Helen and Chloe looked shell-shocked, staring at the woman they had vilified for years, now clearly the victim of their son's manipulations. As court adjourned, Layla leaned over and whispered to Rachel, "That's the sound of justice cracking open." Outside the courtroom, Jonathan refused to meet anyone's eyes as he hurried past reporters and whispers. He had gambled everything, his reputation, his family, even his children's trust, on a lie. And now the consequences were rolling in like a tide he couldn't stop. For Rachel, it wasn't about revenge. It was about finally being free of a past that had been rewritten without her consent. And for the first time in years, she walked out of that courthouse with her name, and her truth, fully intact. In the quiet corridor outside the courtroom, Helen Blake approached Rachel hesitantly, her earlier hostility replaced by a haunted look of regret. "Rachel," she said softly, voice catching, "we didn't know, he told us you had a breakdown. That you took the babies and vanished. We believed him because it was easier than facing the truth." Rachel met her eyes, a mixture of sadness and clarity washing over her. "You believed him when he said the fertility treatments failed because of my stress. You believed him because it protected the image of the son you wanted him to be." Helen opened her mouth to respond. But before she could, Isabel appeared with Luca and Ivy, their curious eyes peeking out from behind her. "Mrs. Blake," Isabel said gently, "I think it's time you met your grandchildren, properly this time." Rachel stepped aside, watching as Helen knelt down, tears forming anew, not from anger this time, but from shame and something that looked like hope. Rachel didn't stay to witness the full reunion. She didn't need to. The healing that began in that moment wasn't hers to complete, but she had helped spark it. And that, she realized, was enough. 6 months later, Rachel Morgan stood by the window of her new office in Asheville, North Carolina, sunlight pouring through the tall panes and casting golden streaks across her drafting table. She had sold her house in Savannah, closed the chapter on everything tied to Jonathan, and opened a small, independent architectural studio nestled in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains. On the wall behind her hung 3 framed pieces, her architect's license, a local newspaper clipping about Jonathan's conviction for document fraud, and a photo Isabel had mailed of Luca and Ivy smiling at their 7th birthday party, surrounded by family. Truly loved, truly known. In her top desk drawer, Rachel kept the stack of unopened Christmas cards from Helen. She wasn't ready yet, but maybe one day. For now, she breathed deeply, watching the morning fog lift. Sometimes, she thought, you lose the life you thought you wanted, only to find the one you were meant to build all along. And in that quiet clarity, Rachel finally found what she had been chasing for years, not justice, not revenge, but peace. The story of Rachel Morgan teaches us that the truth, no matter how deeply buried or carefully disguised, always finds its way to the surface. It's a powerful reminder that standing firm in your integrity, especially when others try to rewrite your story, is not just brave, but necessary. Lies may win attention in the short term, but only truth brings real closure and healing. Sometimes, the path to peace requires walking through betrayal, heartbreak, and public doubt. Yet in choosing truth over revenge, Rachel not only cleared her name but helped a broken family begin to rebuild, honestly, and finally whole.